Live, local, and loosely logical. This is Riter Radio.
Riter Radio continues, and as I tend to do, I like to bring in people to talk about their area of expertise. And right when I started the show, I put things online and sent out texts to all my friends and said, hey, if you've got an area of expertise where you would like to be a senior blank correspondent on Riter Radio, get in touch with me and let's do it. And my buddy Ben Turnbull reached out and said, if rugby ever comes up, I'm your guy. Now, do you purport to be an expert? Because we went to undergrad together. And I don't remember you being on the rugby team, although there was a pretty heavy, a pretty prominent rugby program. But all I know of rugby is that because of it, we have a mutual friend named Sphincter. What I know of rugby is they give nicknames, and those nicknames stick throughout 4 years of college. But I'm hoping you can tell us more. Tell us what's coming up this weekend. Tell us about your planned trip to Chicago. Just fill me in. What's going on, Ben?
Sure, Brad. Well, it's tough to know where to start, but thanks for the introduction. I find that when it comes to rugby, I am generally the only person in the room that knows what's going on. So when I try to watch rugby with my friends and family, there's a lot of questions, and I'm generally the guy giving those answers. I did not play rugby at Geneseo. I didn't pick it up until I was in law school. So I played only men's clubs rugby. And it's a bit different in that we don't have those kinds of nicknames. And when we have drink ups after our games, that's a great part of rugby, is that after every rugby match, you clean up and you socialize with the other team. You get to know people. It makes it a very social game. But in men's club rugby, people's wives, people's children are there. None of the things that you hear about collegiate rugby go on in men's club rugby. So that is much more my experience.
Are you saying there's no shooting of the boot?
There might be a shooting of the boot, which is just pouring a beer into a boot. But in college rugby, sometimes people throw other things into the boot. In men's clubs rugby, it's just people drinking beer out of somebody else's dirty shoe.
Right. The classy way.
As one does from time to time when they're doing such a thing.
All right. Here's what I know about rugby. I know shoot the boot. I know nicknames. I remember 8-man being a thing. There's an 8-man. That's a position. I think that's all I got.
That's my position, Brad, or at least the position that I always told people that I played when I was joining a new team. They would say, what position do you play? And I would say 8-man, because it's a great position. And then they would always stick me at second row. Only people who know things about rugby will understand what that means. But there's anyone who's played second row is now laughing.
All right. Do you continue? Do you still play rugby? Because you're my age. You're 50-ish. Do you still play?
53.
Okay, 53.
I don't play a regular schedule, and I haven't in years. I played this fall, though. There was an alumni match at my law school, and one of my friends was getting a distinguished award as somebody who is a distinguished alumni of the law school, and also just a fantastic rugby player. So I gave a speech for him, and then the two of us in our 50s went and played the next day with other people, some of whom were in their 50s and some of whom were recent grads. And it was a great time. One of the other wonderful things about rugby, Brad, is that you can pick up on a team anywhere you want. I don't know. From what you're telling me, I'm guessing you might not be aware that you have a team right there in Lockport. There's a team in Buffalo. There's a team in South Buffalo.
I'm aware.
Rochester's got two teams.
I'm aware of Gaelic. I'm aware of Gaelic football. Is that anything like rugby? Is that? I mean, obviously it's not the same thing, but
it is sort of like rugby. Not exactly. But my point is, if anybody had any interest in rugby, you could go online, find out where those teams practice, and get a contact information, and just show up there and say, hi, I'd like to learn about rugby. And they would say, great. And they would teach you how to play rugby and be happy about it. I've played with dozens of teams over the years, not even in a regular schedule. Saranac Lake up north by Lake Placid has the largest rugby tournament in the Northern Hemisphere. And myself and a couple of the other guys that used to play regular rugby with, we get a hotel room, we bring our kits up there. Our kits are what you call just your cleats and stuff. And we'd sit around and watch other teams play rugby. And sooner or later, somebody gets hurt and they see a couple of guys sitting around and they say, what do you guys play? And I'd say, I play 8-man. And they'd say, great, we need a second row. And they'd throw me in. You wouldn't even know their names. And everybody was just happy that you were there. It's really, if you don't mind the having to hit other people and occasionally getting hit yourself part, it is a wonderful experience that other sports could learn a lot from in terms of the camaraderie within the teams and even the teams that you play against.
Do you like hitting and getting hit, Ben? Because you don't strike me as the violent type.
Well, it's funny, Brad. You and I were good friends in undergrad, and when I went to law school, I looked around and there was nothing like the camaraderie that you and I had. And rugby was the closest thing. And I just kind of shrugged and thought, well, if I have to do this rugby thing to find a bunch of people to hang out with, I guess I'll do it. And getting hit is not my favorite thing.
No.
Hitting people scratches an itch that I didn't know existed. Here's something else about rugby, and I don't want to keep it in these digressions, Brad, but rugby is different than football in that it is a game of where you are in the field is more important than who has possession of the ball at any given time. So it's a lot of kicking back and forth. But when you get tackled, you have to put the ball down. You have to essentially fumble it and place it on the ball once you get tackled. And then the two teams come together. I'm sure you've seen this if you ever watched a rugby match.
Scrum.
And they push. Oh, it's a scrum or a ruck or a maul. A scrum is a set play. A ruck or a maul is a field play. But it's the same thing. Once that ball is in there, nobody can pick it up until one team pushes over the other and the ball comes out the back foot of one of the teams.
So tug of war in reverse.
It's a reverse tug of war. It's more like multiple sprints. You sprint and then you wrestle a bunch of guys and then you sprint somewhere else and you wrestle a bunch more guys. Most of the guys are not touching the ball most of the time. They're just sprinting and wrestling. But why that matters for the hitting purpose is that you want to give your team the best advantage you can when you're carrying the ball or when you're tackling, which generally means you want your body between the other team and where the ball is. So when you're going to tackle someone, sticking them hard and knocking them backwards just puts the ball closer to that person's team. A good tackle, a proper tackle, is low knees, hips, and you kind of twist them like a gator roll and let them roll over the top of you. Let their momentum fall the other way. That way, the ball is closer to your team to be able to pick up.
So are most of the violent collisions accidents?
Yes, almost all of the violent collisions are accidents. I don't know if you watched Olympic rugby or any of the last World Cup.
No.
But, well, you should, Brad. They're on Peacock, and that's one of the reasons I'm on today, because tomorrow morning at 8:45, probably the two best clubs in the world are going to play one another. It's Ireland and France. What you'll see with the coverage of rugby, if you tried watching it even 5 years ago, it's difficult to follow and you might not understand what's going on. You still might not understand what's going on tomorrow, but they've enacted a bunch of head injury protocols. They take head injuries very seriously. And since there's no good reason to ever hit somebody in the head in rugby, every hit in the head becomes a penalty. So if there's any kind of a contact, whether it's a shoulder or a head-to-head where you hit the ball carrier's head, it's a penalty against the tackler. They give you a yellow card. Play goes on while you sit out for a couple of minutes, and then a bunch of guys they call it the bunker. They review the close-up footage of the tackle to see exactly what went on with someone's head. So they're looking to see, was it intentional? If it was intentional, was it dangerous? And whether or not there was any mitigation, like whether or not after you accidentally hit somebody in the head, did you try to hold on to them to make sure you didn't just like smash them into the ground or whatever? And that can turn into a red card and get you kicked out of the game if you did something intentional against somebody. Mm-hmm. So that makes it safer. And they also have mouth guards with sensors in them that tell when someone's had a hard hit.
Really?
But most importantly for you, the viewer, and obviously the most important thing is people aren't getting hurt as much as they used to. But most important thing for you as a viewer is because of these new protocols, they have close-up cameras on every ball carrier throughout the entire thing. So while they're watching the replay, you're also watching the replay. So instead of what it used to be 10 years ago where you just had one camera kind of backed up that would zoom in and out, you now have multiple cameras right in on their faces, and you're watching their heads kind of get hit this way and that way. You're seeing the look on their faces. It's really a super watchable sport now in a way that pretty much all European sports Didn't used to be. They just didn't have the quality of American sports, and rugby has really stepped up its game in terms of watchability. So I strongly recommend Ireland, France tomorrow in lead up to the game that's going to be in November 1st. Ireland is playing the New Zealand All Blacks in Soldier Field in Chicago.
I've heard of them.
Super contentious game. It's going to be an awesome match. I think they've played something like 109 times in the last 111 years. The last time they played, I think, was 2016. Ireland beat them, and it was the first time in 100 years that had happened, and they've split their matches 5-5 since then. So it's going to be fantastic. I assume it's going to be a bigger deal here than any other rugby match has been before in this country. And I think watching the match tomorrow is really going to get you used to seeing the Irish players. Maybe you pick some favorites, maybe you understand the rules a little bit more. But now is when you should start watching rugby during the Six Nations tournaments. So when it comes to next November, you are primed to watch Ireland hopefully beat the All Blacks.
All right. Ben Turnbull is our senior rugby correspondent. I don't know how often we're going to have rugby conversations, but I like this one so far. I wish I'd been writing things down because there are about 5 different things I want to follow up on. Let's see. One, you said we were good friends in college. I don't shy away from stating that we were in a fraternity together, and that was the kind of camaraderie you were seeking. I know there is a the frat boy thing that people talk about, but I don't know. Our experience. There's a reason that we just held our 25th consecutive fantasy football draft in Saratoga, and it's because we've got 15 guys for 14 spots that are all still super tight. So looking for that at your next school is not anything to be ashamed of. I just want to throw that out there. What else did you say? When you said that it's a ruck as opposed to a scrum, I now remember there being a position called rucker. Am I right?
Hooker.
Gordon was a hooker.
Very close.
Gordon was a hooker, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Gordon was a hooker.
Right.
Gordon can play. I've played a little bit with Gordon as adults as well, and Gordon can play anything. He's fantastic.
Okay. And he's old like us, too, so good for him. What else did I want to follow up on? Rugby, game on TV. I don't know. I'm lost.
I can give you a couple of pointers that if...
Oh, I got one.
Go ahead.
Do I remember correctly that unlike in American football, where you score, I appreciate this about rugby. You actually, I don't know if it's called a touchdown, but you actually have to touch the ball down, right?
That's one of the funny things. Yes, you actually have to touch the ball down, except for it's not called a touchdown. It's a try.
It's a try.
Whereas in American football, you don't have to touch down to get a touchdown.
Right.
You just have to try. Just to sort of poke it over an imaginary line in the air.
Right.
And if you try and you get close enough, you get a score. Called a touchdown, even though you don't touch it down.
Right. And then when you touch it down, it's called a try, even though just trying isn't enough to score. You have to actually succeed. It should be called a success.
It is one of the most confusing things if people don't know that rule when you're watching rugby. You think someone has clearly gotten into the try zone. They've fallen down, and you're like, well, that's it. They've clearly scored. And then the ref says no and waves his hands, and then something else happens and no one explains it to you. It's because the other team has jammed their hands under the ball and stopped that person from letting that ball touch the ground, which stops the score from happening. So if you're watching and that happens, don't be confused. Right. What happened is the other team jammed their hands under the ball.
So essentially what would be considered goaltending in basketball, but it's illegal in basketball, but it's awesome in rugby.
Awesome in rugby, not in any way illegal.
Okay, here's the other thing I remember. After a try, there is some sort of a point after kick thing, right?
Yes, tries are 5, point after kicks are 2.
Okay, that comes from exactly where you went in, right? Like you have to back up there. So ideally you would want to score right down the middle, but that's obviously going to be more protected. Am I correct in my assumption there?
Correct, and you will see people run into the try zone. You're like, great, they scored. Why are they still running? And why are those people still chasing them? And that is one of the reasons. It's when you play men's clubs rugby or college rugby, it can be a fairly devastating mistake for someone to make where they run in and they forget that you have to touch it down, and they're put the ball up in the air and they're celebrating because they think they've scored a touchdown. and then someone just hits them really hard and knocks the ball out of their hands, and they haven't scored whatsoever, because you have to put the ball down, and you have to you want to put the ball down as close to the middle as you can. So if you have not put the ball down and you're in the end zone, somebody is going to hit you and try to take the ball away from you.
You know, here's one of the other things that I thought of. This is Ben Turnbull, our senior rugby correspondent. This conversation alone is making me think I don't just need senior correspondents. I just need people to explain things to me, like, hey, I'm suddenly interested in this. Bring on somebody. Tell me what the hell's going on, and simplify it for me so that I can help me watch television better. That's why I really need to improve at my TV viewing, and that's kind of a service that you're providing, not just to me, but to all the listeners here on Riter Radio. I appreciate that about you, Ben.
I'm happy to be of service. I had a bunch of friends over to ice fish about a year ago, and there was no ice, so it was World Cup Rugby was on, and I made them all watch World Cup Rugby with me. And it turns out they only needed 2 or 3 things explained to them to really enjoy watching a match, and that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping the audience takes away from this, is that you don't need to know all the rules. You just need to know that it's really watchable.
Next time I bring you on, I'll have you explain euchre. I understand euchre, but it's the same type of thing. Either you speak the language or you don't. And I have found watching a new sport can be fun. Like the Buffalo Bandits are an indoor lacrosse team. I had season tickets for 2 years. I had a blast, and I still don't understand the rules at all of box lacrosse, because it seemed to me a guy would beat the crap out of somebody else, like in the head with his stick, and that would be just change of possession. But then something very insignificant looking would happen, and the whole crowd around me starts chanting to the box, to the box, to the BOX, 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 whatever they do. And then if that was punishable by being seated in a penalty box, whereas attempted murder was change of possession. And it was okay. I mean, I would have preferred to understand it, I guess, but it was still enjoyable despite the fact that not every single part of it made sense. This, honestly, doesn't sound that much different from my mom watching the Bills, to be quite honest. Like, generally, she knows which shirts to root for. She knows that they want to get the ball in that direction. She understands touchdowns and field goals. Does she know what a first down is? I'm not positive. Does she know about any of that? I don't know. But she still watches the team and roots for them because that's what you do. So you don't need to know everything to enjoy it. And also, let me throw this out there. Can you find rugby on, like, let's say, FanDuel or DraftKings?
You can, and whether or not rugby is an interesting sport in that most of the guys that you'll see playing tomorrow morning, they play professional rugby someplace, but they're playing for the country now, not with their professional teams. So they call it a test match when you are not playing with your professional team, or when you're playing for your country that's not in the World Cup or the Olympics. It's just a friendly match that is kind of a tournament they've put together, but doesn't really mean anything in terms of standings or the World Cup. The way to know whether or not it's a test match or a meaningful match is go on your favorite sporting website and try to bet on it. If you can bet on it, then it's not a test match. If you cannot bet on it, then it is a test match.
Okay. No betting on tomorrow, then, it sounds like?
No betting on tomorrow. We can have a whole conversation at some other time about the joy of betting on rugby, because rugby in international play generally has pool play. So by the end of pool play, you end up with mismatches, but the point totals still matter for purposes of where your standings are going to be when you advance from your pool.
Oh.
So you have really good teams playing against really not good teams, and you'd think the really good teams would sit their really good players in the final rounds of pool play when they've already won their pool, but they don't. They run the score up on them, which makes point differentials super interesting for those of you who enjoy the gambling aspect of rugby.
All right. Since this is a real radio show and not just a podcast, I do have to stop talking to you now. Do you have any? I'll give you like another 30 seconds. You've got anything else super important that you need to tell people going into this game between it's France and who?
It's France and Ireland.
Ireland, right?
Keep an eye out for Bunde Aki. He's from New Zealand, and he plays for Ireland now. He's an Irish resident. And there's a gentleman named Antoine Dupont. Say it with me, Brad.
Antoine Dupont. Antoine Dupont.
He is the scrum half for France, and I don't think there's a better rugby player in the world right now, and I don't think there's a tougher player. He is giving 100% every step of the way, and so is Bunde Aki. All these guys are. You can see it on their faces because they're not wearing helmets.
If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, that guy you just named is my favorite scrum half in the world. and you know that. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I've been talking about that guy that you just said for years, whatever his name was. All right, Ben, we got to go. That's Ben Turnbull, senior rugby correspondent. We'll have you back soon. Thanks, man.
Been a pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back. This is Riter Radio.